Good evening, Mr. Bond fans. I regret to inform you that if your primary source of GoldenEye viewing has been the UK VHS or the UK Special Edition DVD, then you have not been receiving the full GoldenEye experience. You've actually been receiving the full GoldenEye experience minus several seconds, and hey, this is GoldenEye we're talking about. Every second counts. Now, Bond films being edited for violence is nothing new. If you've ever caught a mid-afternoon showing of Licence to Kill on linear TV here in the UK, chances are you didn't see Milton Crest's head explode strawberry jam. Obviously, these pre-watershed edits are there to prevent channel-hopping children from accidentally stumbling upon something that might traumatize them for life. But hey, I mean, these films never did me any harm when I was a kid. I was exposed to Xenia and the Admiral in bed at the tender age of 9 years old, and other than spawning my sense of fear at any form of physical intimacy, I turned out just fine. But surely when it comes to enjoying the film on an official home media release, you take it for granted that what you're buying is the true, uncut version of that particular film, right?
Hope springs eternal.
Well, not in GoldenEye's case. It wasn't until the Ultimate Edition DVD release in 2006 that here in the UK you'd be able to buy the uncut version of the film at your local physical media store. But what was so grossly offensive to the British Board of Film Classification that meant that the film had to be edited in the first place?
I hope we're going to have some gratuitous sex and violence.
Not if I have anything to say about it. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, and why it's perhaps debatable as to whether the uncut version of GoldenEye that we have is truly the uncut version. But first, let's look at the cuts in question and why they were made. Here in the UK, film classifications are decided by the BBFC. Most older Bond films carry a PG rating, meaning that some scenes may be unsuitable for children 8 years or less, but since Brosnan took on the role, Bond films on their first theatrical runs at least have always carried a 12-12A certificate, meaning that the films are deemed suitable for 12-year-olds and over, and with a 12A certificate specifically, someone under the age of 12 can still see a 12A rated film at the cinema, so long as they're accompanied by an adult. This is obviously a sweet spot age rating for producers of big budget action content like Bond. It means you're not cutting off a potentially lucrative early teen market, but you still have an allowance for some violence, some bad language, maybe even a little bit of sex, and perhaps unsurprisingly, GoldenEye was really skirting the line of what was deemed to be acceptable at the time of its release. Some cuts were made prior to the film even reaching cinemas in order to appease international censors, and I'll get to that topic in a little bit, but here in the UK, additional cuts were made on top of those to a selection of action scenes in order for the film to be releasable with a 12 rating. The first and certainly the most notable omission being this moment towards the end of the film.
Wait for your turn.
I can remember exactly how much my mind was blown when I saw that scene in full for the first time, because when I was getting into James Bond as a kid, the VHS was my primary source of GoldenEye greatness, and that little snippet is not in here. Yeah, the scene rather clunkily cut the whole bit of Natalia swinging the log, Xenia's line, the headbutt, which is slightly problematic for the scene because it's entirely because of Natalia's intervention in that moment that Bond is able to make the most of Xenia being distracted and take her out. In the VHS edit that I was used to seeing, it just felt like Bond had had enough of doing his pain face, and the eventual defeat of Xenia felt a little easy as a result. It also just played like Natalia had slept through the whole thing, only to get woken up by Bond just as Xenia is being crushed against a tree, and it always played a bit odd to me that Natalia would wake up and have no questions about what she was seeing. By this point in the adventure, I always assumed she was just like, oh, okay, woman being crushed against a tree, helicopter going down, no biggie, just taking it in her stride, I guess. The other cuts take place during Bond and Alec's brutal fight towards the film's climax, which is slightly less brutal in the 12-rated cut, as several headbutts were, again, rather clunkily removed in a variety of places. It was interesting going back and revisiting this version of the film for the purpose of making this video, as the fight between Bond and Alec is one of my favourite Bond villain showdowns of the whole series, and the edits to remove the headbutts just give you some really clunky jump cuts, and there's an especially heinous cut towards the end of the fight where Bond headbutting Trevelyan was kind of his finishing move to gain the upper hand, and without it, it just kind of plays almost like Bond has kneed him in the balls off screen or something. Now, you might have noticed a trend in these cuts so far, and yes, this was at a time where pretty much a headbutt in a film would automatically rate a film a 15, and it affected a heck of a lot of films, from Star Wars Attack of the Clones, to Lara Croft Tomb Raider, to The Mummy Returns, to even Shrek 2 that had to make edits to remove headbutts. This is a total aside, but I became very familiar and tuned into this particular rule after, at my sixth form college, we had a guest talk from a lady who worked at that time at the BBFC. She was a relative of my general studies teacher, so she came in one day to do this talk. I'm not sure entirely what the curriculum value of this particular talk was, but it's something that I've remembered very distinctly over the years. And one of the things that she talked about were, you know, some of the red line issues for the BBFC, like the things that you can absolutely not do in particular tiers. So for instance, you know, in like a PG rated film, for instance, you can't show a child getting into a washing machine because that's imitable behavior and they don't want kids climbing into washing machines. And another thing that she talked about was, you know, the levels of violence, and headbutts came up as a very specific, like, if you have a headbutt in a film, it's gonna be 15 rated or over, and she had several clips to share to exemplify this point. I remember that one of them was from Tomb Raider, and she showed us the uncut version and the cut version, and at this point in my life I was really fascinated by this kind of stuff, so I still remember like really geeking out because the clip of the uncut Tomb Raider that she showed had like time codes on it and everything. It looked like a real rough thing. I was very into this particular lecture, and yeah, the no headbutt thing stuck with me ever since. Now at some point in time this rule was clearly dropped. As recently as No Time to Die, we are witness to headbutts during fight scenes, and that film was released as a 12A in cinemas and a 12 on physical media, but due to being so programmed in my early and teen years to never see headbutts in 12 rated films, if I do see a headbutt in, you know, even in a Marvel film or what have you, it always slightly catches me off guard. I'm half tempted to call the BBFC and tell them that they've missed one, but no, I guess that headbutts are permissible in 12 rated films these days at least. Interesting to note though that there are examples of headbutts in Bond films prior to GoldenEye, in films that were rated PG and still are rated PG. Moonraker springs to mind, as does a moment in the pre-credits of The Living Daylights. Do let me know in the comment section below if there are any other instances of headbutts in Bond films prior to GoldenEye. But back in 2006, when the uncut version of GoldenEye was released as part of the Ultimate Edition set, the headbutts was still enough to up the film's rating to a 15 certificate, which is what it has been in the UK ever since. This is the version of the film that's widely available on Blu-ray too, and it has all of the headbutts reinstated. Interestingly though, in between the VHS and the Ultimate Edition DVD, we have the Special Edition DVD of GoldenEye. This was released in 2001, 12 rated. It maintains all of the edits to remove all of the headbutt cuts, but interestingly, it reinstated most of the footage of Natalya coming to Bond's aid. Just the moment of impact of the headbutt itself was removed, making it seem like Xenia just throws Natalya to the ground instead.
Wait for your turn.
I distinctly remember seeing this footage for the first time on the Special Edition DVD, and it blew my mind. At that point in time, I didn't know much about different cuts of movies existing in various forms, and I remember thinking when I saw this version of the film, oh okay, this is the uncut version of GoldenEye, whereas in reality I'd still need to wait a few more years before I'd get all of the headbutting that my 11-year-old self had been so deprived of. Or at least the headbutting pleasure intact within the film itself, for all of the BBFC's valiant efforts to prevent the 14 and under crowd witnessing such dangerous, imitable behaviour. The exertion is slightly undermined by the fact that the scene itself is included on the same damn DVD as a part of one of the extras.
I play Xenia Onatopp in GoldenEye, and as the name already suggests, I'm on top of things, literally and figuratively.
Wait for your turn.
Yeah, this is the World of 007 TV special hosted by Elizabeth Hurley, and during the bit where Famke Janssen is talking about her character, they just play the headbutt scene. Like, I mean, great stuff. Very thorough work went into making sure that that scene was only viewed by eyes 15 years or over. But nowadays it doesn't matter, because as you can clearly see here, we have the uncut version of GoldenEye readily available. Or do we? Where things get quite interesting is when you start to look at the cuts that were made to the film prior to its theatrical release anywhere. Martin Campbell cites several moments in the film's audio commentary that were cut and are not available in any released version of the film. Here he is talking about one moment from the film's pre-title sequence.
Interesting point, we had to cut the actual shooting. It was originally the original cut.
Shooting through the head here.
Yes, and now that actually, it turns out that both censors in the US and England objected to that. And so you'll see, of course, you don't actually see him pull the trigger.
You just see him fall over.
That's right, that was a censor cut. Again, I don't think it lost anything, and there he goes, yeah.
But thanks to some vintage promotional material, we have a glimpse into what might have been in the case of another cut. This is from a Japanese promo that contains deleted footage of Bond chopping Xenia unconscious, and in order to appease the censors, they had to go back and film a totally new insert, as Martin Campbell explains in the commentary.
Now, interestingly, in this scene, of course, there's a rabbit punch coming up, which we couldn't show the rabbit punch because the British censor objected, and it wasn't worth doing two versions for England and America. But ironically, I think it's almost just as vicious off-screen as it is on, but that's censorship for you. So,
Yeah, we had to actually go out and spend a day shooting that.
Yep, I remember that.
Little insert.
Actually, the same day we did the gun barrel again, if you remember, so it did.
This relates back to what I was alluding to earlier on when I mentioned that maybe we don't have a true uncut version of GoldenEye anywhere, because shots like that are still hidden away in a vault somewhere, presumably as part of perhaps a rough cut or an assembly cut or what have you, that would have been preemptively sent to film classification boards around the world to solicit potential issue fixes while the film was still in production, and they could accommodate changes with a little additional filming here and there. This is not a purely modern thing either. The BBFC have a podcast, and in honour of the 50th anniversary of the James Bond series back in 2012, they dedicated an entire episode to discussing James Bond's history with the censors, and there are some interesting little tidbits in there.
But in the case of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which was the one George Lazenby Bond film, the board objected to a line in the film in which Bond says, "I feel a slight stiffness coming on." And the board's solution to this, which was accepted by the producers of the film, was to add "in my shoulder." And if you listen very carefully to the line of dialogue on the film today, you can still hear where that additional piece of dialogue has been added to the film.
Is anything the matter, Secretary?
Just a slight stiffness coming on in the shoulder.
Like it or not, the BBFC and the American equivalent, the MPAA, do have influence over how films are made. Now, I'm not about to start referring to versions of On Her Majesty's Secret Service as censored because they contain the shoulder line, even though it was in there as a BBFC request. It's just a part of the process that there will be multiple different edits of any film floating around at various times during production, so labeling a film uncut, it can, it is a marketing ploy, it's a promotional ploy, let's face it, from time to time, and depending on where you stand regarding what constitutes an uncut version of the film, you might not even consider the uncut version of GoldenEye that we have to be all that uncut after all. And just while we're on the subject of Bond and the BBFC, there are a couple of other films that I would like to touch on. First being Tomorrow Never Dies, which was in a similar situation to GoldenEye, with having scenes removed for the UK VHS and Special Edition DVD releases before finally being released in an uncut form on Ultimate Edition DVD, with the age rating upped from a 12 to a 15. The offending scenes in question take place during Bond and Wayland's assault on Carver's stealth ship at the end of the film. In the uncut version, you can see Lynn utilising some concealed throwing stars and Bond stamping on the face of a barely conscious goon.
I'm gonna stop the missile.
But in the edited version, the throwing stars are removed completely, with the edit making it seem like Bond takes out both guards with his machine gun, and interestingly, to get around the bit with him stamping on the guy's face, the footage of the guard coming around is reversed, so it seems like rather than waking up, he's falling unconscious, and Bond just observes this and then goes about his business. It makes for such a weird moment. So yes, for the Ultimate Edition DVD, the film's rating was upped to a 15, with the previous cuts reinstated, which is all fair enough, and yet, the film was once again submitted for classification to the BBFC in 2012, and interestingly, the uncut version of the film was rated 12, so consider yourselves lucky 12 to 14-year-olds, you have the ability to buy the uncut version of Tomorrow Never Dies, a right that was withheld from some of your forebearers. A likely explanation for this downgrade is that the BBFC, well, similar to headbutts, they used to be much stricter on the use of martial arts weapons, which was likely the main reason for the initial cuts. Just ask the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies from the 1990s, but these restrictions laxed over the years, which means that the film could be downgraded to a 12. But interestingly, GoldenEye was also resubmitted for classification in 2012, and that film remained as a 15. So I would hazard, my educated guess would be that that film has remained as a 15 due to some of the more sexualized acts of violence in that film, courtesy of Xenia Onatop, which I think ratings boards are much more savvy to in this day and age. Edits for violence are not restricted to just the Brosnan era either. Daniel Craig's first Bond film, Casino Royale, underwent some cuts to the torture scene at the end of the film to secure a 12 rating for its theatrical release. Cuts were maintained for initial home media releases before being passed uncut at a 15 rating, which it has maintained on releases since. So you can rest easy knowing you're getting the full Bond bollock bashing experience. On a related note of reclassification, Diamonds Are Forever, a film that was rated PG for so many years, was actually upped to a 12 rating by the BBFC in 2012. Reasons cited included the bit where Bond rips off a lady's bikini top and strangles her with it, as well as the potentially stereotyped portrayal of gay villains Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd. We'll see if further reclassifications of older Bond movies occur in the years to come, I guess. I mean, I think there's enough subject matter there for an entire video, but I mean, hey, as long as the films are available in their uncut form, I'm an adult, they can rate them 18 for all I care. Please do let me know your own thoughts on these subjects in the comment section below, particularly if, like me, you were only ever exposed to the cut versions of GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies, and seeing them in their uncut forms gave you as much of a surprise as it did me. Also below, do click the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button to stay super up to date on future video uploads, and until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.